insignificant.
Okay, let's play some damn shit.
How far away are the stars? Also
Street
comprehend
war.
with crystal clarity why no rescuer has arrived for
You
us,
snap
and why
that
no
slut
rescuer
from
ever.
China.
Let us peel away the layers of science fiction. Let us discard the Hollywood
Holy
fantasies.
slut.
Let us observe the universe in its true, unvarnished state.
You
The first
whore.
verdict, the one that fractures our comprehension before we even depart our planet, is distance. We utter the word space with casual ease, yet we
So
fail to
much
genuinely
love.
apprehend its meaning. Our biology renders us incapable of truly grasping the magnitudes we are about to discuss. Your brain is calibrated to comprehend distances you can traverse by foot or by vehicle. Perhaps if you are a seasoned traveler, you can conceptualize the span of a flight from London to Sydney. That is your mental limit. So let us attempt to shatter that boundary. Let us ascend the ladder of scale. Begin with Earth. It is a sphere of rock roughly 12,742 kilometers in diameter. To you, that is an entire world. To the cosmos, it is a mote of dust.
She
You can
has a
circumvent by air
strong
in 2
smoke.
days. It is a comprehensible domain. Now take a
Spit.
step back. Our sun sits
Spit,
approximately
spit,
150 million
spit.
kilometers distant. Light, the swiftest courier in existence, requires over 8 minutes to bridge that gulf. If the sun were to blink out of existence at this very second, you would continue to bask in its illusory glow for 8 more minutes before perpetual night fell.
Look,
That is a void you can still in some way measure with the passage of time. But now take the next monumental step, the nearest star to us, not some far-flung, the speed of light barrier galaxy, but our immediate celestial neighbor, Proxima Centauri. It lies 424 light-years away. Your intuition hears 424 and interprets it as a modest figure, something you could count on one hand. Let us translate that into a human time frame. The fastest object
Come on,
our
you
species has
slap
ever
that
constructed
slut
is the
from
Parker
China.
Solar Probe. It hurtles through the void at about 692,000 km/h. That velocity is sufficient to travel from New York to Tokyo in less than 60 seconds. It is a speed that defies ordinary imagination.
Fuck off.
If you boarded that probe and set a course for Proxima Centauri, how long would your journey require? A month? A year? The answer is 6,600 years. That is our closest stellar neighbor. If you had embarked from Earth at the precise moment the final stones were being laid, on the Great Pyramids, traveling at the maximum speed humanity has ever achieved, you would only now be approaching your destination.
Okay.
That is merely the house next
So
door.
get
Let
your
us
dick,
scale
get
up
your
once
dick.
more. The Milky Way galaxy.
So
our
get your
home
dick, get your
metropolis
dick,
of
get your
stars,
dick, get your
spans
dick.
100,000 light-years from end to end. If you aim to traverse it at the velocity of the
So
Parker
get your
Solar
dick,
Probe,
get your
your
dick.
voyage would consume hundreds
So
of
get your dick,
millions of
get your
years.
dick, get your
That
dick,
is
get
a
your
longer
dick.
duration than the entire evolutionary timeline.
So
of
get your
mammals.
dick, get
You
your
would
dick,
evolve
get your
into
dick, get your
entirely
dick
different
wet.
species before reaching the midway point. Before we descend
Who
further
is
into
more-
the
who is
existential
this
spiral,
fucking-
I have a small request. We are poised to grapple with concepts that grow even more formidable, such as why time travel is an impossibility, and why your biological form is incompatible with space. If you wish to continue probing the most profound depths of physics alongside me, please take a moment to press that
No, it
like
is
button.
white. And I ain't talking Joseph
Signals to
Stalin
the
either.
algorithm
I'm talking about
that imply
Stalin.
unvarnished truth
That
over
slut.
comforting falsehoods. And it enables me to continue producing these intensive explorations. Alright, we have established that space is immeasurably vast. But you might be thinking, so what? We simply need to achieve great velocity. This brings us to the second verdict, the most merciless verdict of all, the speed of light. Most people conceptualize the speed of light, roughly 300,000 kilometers, as a technical hurdle akin to the sound barrier. We once believed we could not fly faster than sound. Then we developed superior engines, and indeed we surpassed it. Therefore, surely we merely require a more advanced engine to Einstein's relativity-explained breach the light barrier. Correct? Incorrect. The speed of light is not an engineering limitation. It is a structural pillar of reality itself. It is the speed of causality. It is the maximum velocity at which an event occurring here can influence an event occurring there. Herein lies the trap. In our daily experience, if you push a car, it accelerates. If you push it with twice the force, it accelerates proportionally more. This is linear thinking. However, as you approach the cosmic speed limit, physics abandons linearity. It becomes asymptotic. As you propel an object to greater speeds, it gains kinetic energy. But as you near that ultimate boundary, a bizarre phenomenon occurs. The energy you funnel into the spacecraft ceases to increase its velocity significantly, and instead begins to make it effectively heavier in terms of relativistic mass. The harder you push, the more vehemently the universe resists.
Now fuck up with all this fucking
That
dope.
mass, 100% of light speed, demands not a vast amount of energy, but infinite energy. I do not mean all the energy contained within our sun. I mean a literally literally endless quantity. There is insufficient energy in the entirety of the observable universe to accelerate a single grain of sand to the speed of light. It is an impassable vertical wall. You might reach 90%, perhaps 99%, even 99.99999% if you expend a galaxy's worth of fuel. But you will never ever cross that threshold. Therefore, aliens cannot simply travel here. The answer is elementary because it is impossible. It is irrelevant if they are a Type 3 civilization that consumes black holes for sustenance. They still inhabit the same universe we do. They still must obey Einstein's laws. This leads directly to the practical nightmare of interstellar travel. Suppose you accept this universal speed limit. You decide, fine, we shall journey at a mere 10% of light speed. That is leisurely for the cosmos, but staggeringly fast by our standards. This introduces us to the third energy and the tyranny of the rocket equation. This is the verdict that truly annihilates the dream. It is not about philosophy.
Quitters never win. Quitters never quit.
Tchaikovsky derived the rocket equation. It may sound mundane, but it is arguably the most energy requirements become absurd, ruthless formula in history. It states the following. To propel a ship, you require fuel. However, fuel possesses mass. Therefore, to move the propel ship, you need additional fuel. But that extra fuel also has mass, so you require even more fuel to move the extra fuel needed to move the original fuel. It is an exponential curse. Let us illustrate with a concrete scenario. Imagine you wish to dispatch a vessel to the nearest star within a human lifetime, say 40 years. You must accelerate to a respectable fraction of light speed. And then this is the element often overlooked. You must decelerate upon arrival. You must come to a stop. This implies you must transport all the fuel required for the braking maneuver across that immense distance while simultaneously accelerating that braking fuel for the entire journey if you perform the calculations using our contemporary best chemical rockets. The fuel mass necessary to accelerate a single human to Proxima Centauri within a plausible time frame would surpass the mass of the entire observable universe. All right, let us upgrade. Let us employ nuclear fusion. We have not mastered it yet, but let us imagine. Even with fusion propulsion, to send a modest ship to a neighboring star, the vessel would need to consist almost entirely of fuel. We are discussing a flying fuel tank the size of the Empire State Building. All to deliver a payload no larger than a toaster. What about antimatter? That is the ultimate power source, correct? Antimatter represents the most potent fuel known. A single gram could annihilate a city. But here is the catch. We manufacture antimatter and particle accelerators, atom by painstaking atom. It costs billions of dollars to produce a few nanogs. To synthesize sufficient antimatter to fuel a starship, you would need to harness the entire energy output of human civilization for millions of years just for a single filling of the tank. Recall the universe operates on a ruthless cost-benefit analysis. Even if a civilization is sufficiently advanced to harness the energy of a star, a Dyson sphere-level society, they are also sufficiently advanced to form the math. They would scrutinize the energy expenditure required to dispatch a fragile biological entity or a robot to a tiny blue planet 10,000 light-years distant, and they would conclude it is a catastrophic misallocation of resources. Why incinerate a star's worth of energy? Can wormholes save us? To visit a planet that may hold no interest when you could utilize that energy to construct a virtual utopia within your own stellar system. Advanced civilizations are not merely powerful, they are supremely efficient. Interstellar travel is the very definition of inefficiency. But suppose they are obstinate. Suppose they possess infinite resources and disregard the laws of efficiency. They launch a ship. Now they confront the fourth verdict, biology. We adore envisioning humans in sleek spacesuits bounding across alien landscapes, but the human body is an extraordinarily high-maintenance entity. It evolved for one specific environment, Earth, one standard gravity, a protective atmosphere, a shielding magnetic field. Space is a radioactive hellscape. The moment you depart Earth's magnetic shield, you are bombarded by cosmic rays. These are not mere light. They are high-velocity subatomic bullets, protons, and heavy ions traveling near light speed. They do not merely strike your skin. They penetrate your ship's hull, tear through your body, shred your DNA like a shotgun blast through a library. On a voyage to Mars, your risk of cancer increases dramatically. On a journey to another star, you would perish long before passing Pluto. Effective shielding would require meters thick barriers of lead, water, or concrete. But remember the rocket equation. Shielding is massive. Mass invades more fuel. More fuel increases mass further. It is the loop of doom revisited. And it is not solely radiation. It is gravity. In zero gravity, your bones demineralize. Your heart muscle atrophies from disuse. Your eyes deform. After 6 months aboard the International Space Station, astronauts return with degraded health. Now imagine a voyage lasting 600 years. Simply place them in cryogenic sleep. You suggest yet freezing the living cell causes internal water to crystallize, forming microscopic daggers that lacerate the cell's membranes. We possess no method to cryopreserve a human being without reducing them to a non-viable slurry.
Man, this is boring as fuck.
What if the early Christian church didn't start the way we've actually been told? The usual story is simple. Jesus preached, the apostles followed, the church spread, and then eventually the Gospels were written. But what if that sequence was put together much later? This changes absolutely everything.
Suck my slut.
Alright, so what if everything we think we know about the early church is actually based on nothing more than a series of literary inventions? That's the question at the heart of Robin Faith Walsh's 2021 book, The Origins of Early Christian Literature. Ask the average person familiar with early Christian history about how the church came into being, and the answer will run something like the following. 1. A guy called Jesus preaching Galilee and Judea around the early 30s. 2. He acquired a small following and said some controversial things which led to the temple authorities in Jerusalem to coax the local Roman governor into having him crucified. 3. His followers, the apostles, continued to build the Christian movement. 4. St. Paul joined them and began preaching to Greek Gentiles around the eastern Mediterranean. 5. By the 70s, the movement had spread and Christian writers wrote down the oral tradition of the church in the form of the Gospels about Jesus' life. 6. These books were then assembled into the New Testament, which became the cornerstone of the church by 100. But the problem with this is maybe that none of this is true at all. In fact, Walsh has argued in The Origins of Early Christian Literature there probably was no Christian church at all in the first century. It's a myth. Okay, let's explore this argument. Hey, if you're into these types of videos, check out my Substack for ad-free early access. I also write articles on the topics I'm exploring. It really helps out the channel, as I would love to spend more time exploring these topics. Cheers.
God fucking damn it. That's so... God,
The Origins of Early Christian Literature is a complex book. I don't want to try and look at every nook and cranny of it here. Instead, I want to explore the core argument and Walsh's thesis that it is a fundamental myth that the Christian church existed in the first century. She contends that the early Christian church, at least in the form that we think of it today, did not emerge directly out of the Jesus movement in the middle of the first century. This controversial view of the church tries to get us to believe that Christianity evolved organically from the very point of Jesus' alleged crucifixion and death. It then follows that the Gospels were passed down orally for a few decades as the Christian community grew and expanded out of Judea and Galilee to places like Syria, Greece, Turkey, and Egypt. Most of the New Testament was then written down in the second half of the first century. And that's the controversial view. What Walsh argues, quite contrary to this, is that the New Testament was primarily written by educated Greco-Roman writers in the second century, who were largely making up huge swaths of the early history of Christianity. As such, it was only in the second century that a Christian church was created based on some fairly loose strands of information about a religious movement that emerged in the middle of the first century. Walsh's approach is pretty imaginative, as she notes with a memorable turn of phrase in the introduction to the book. The textual evidence for the early history of Christianity has been mined and remined, so extensively both by Christian and non-Christian scholars over the century, and looking for an original take or something new to say is a bit like looking for diamonds in a dunghill. Her approach is therefore to examine a wide array of Christian pagan literature from the ancient world to explore what the literary culture of the Mediterranean in ancient times was. This means that there were lengthy digressions in Walsh's book on the work of Aesop, fables, fame. Homer, the alleged author of the Iliad and the Odyssey, the Roman satirist Petronius, Philo of Alexandria, a Jewish writer of the early 1st century, and the writings of Xenophon, student of Socrates, and a historian and philosopher in his own right. Along the way, we even digress to explore Thomas Jefferson and 19th century German Romanticism. This is because Walsh is interested to explore why people and groups present literary fables as actual history. I mean, come on, what motivated Petronius to present a satirical version of Emperor Nero's court? Elements of which were presumably made up, right? What inspired the Greeks to treat fables of the Trojan War as written about by Homer as actual elements of their history? And Walsh's argument is that we need to understand this desire for collective myth-making within ancient societies in order to fully understand how the early Christian church was invented.
Come on, you slant-eyed slut.
Walsh refers to this idea of creating a pseudo-historical past for a people or community as the invention of tradition. She claims that it is central to how the New Testament was written and how early Christianity was devised in the 2nd century. More specifically, she notes that the invention of the tradition is, quote,
the factitious development of continuity between an institution, state, or other social group and a historic narrative, ritual, symbol, or figure. Invented traditions are designed to link groups to a suitable historic past.
Okay, so they adhere to a number of general principles. First, they establish a kind of social cohesion or sense of membership within a group. Secondly, they legitimise the institutions within the group and the hierarchy. Thirdly, they socialise members of the group to adopt a certain set of core ideas and beliefs. A key part of this in ancient times is having an invented history or tradition. This prevailed everywhere around the ancient Mediterranean. Consider the Trojan War and how it acted as a base for understanding collective Greek identity, or the origin myths of individual cities and their semi-divine founders and later lawmakers like Theseus and Solon in Athens. These myths and traditions not only united people of these cities and communities, they also reinforced the power structures within them. In turn, adherence to the kind of social structures and politics handed down by these semi-legendary figures socialised members and citizens into accepting the orthodox views within their communities. For Walsh, the Acts of the Apostles and the 3 synoptic Gospels were absolutely central to this process, both inventing a shared tradition for the Christian movement and a history that legitimised and strengthened their movement. To quote Walsh directly,
placed together in circulation, or more accurately, canon, the Synoptic Gospels helped to construct a cohesive and legitimizing history for Christianity. Accounts of healings, resurrections, miraculous mass conversions, and angelically abetted prison breaks in the Acts of the Apostles fortified this remarkable chronicle of the origins and development of Christianity. Miraculous beginnings and powerful figures communicated demand to be taken seriously.
Things like ritual meals and baptism, as they are described in the Gospels and the Acts of the Apostles, were central elements of this, helping to reinforce community values amongst the emerging Christian church. This is why baptism and the Eucharist became such a central element to Christian belief and worship. And I should note here that Walsh doesn't take a firm stance on when these books of the New Testament were actually written. And indeed, she argues that there is little reason to question the scholarly consensus that the earliest of the four canonical Gospels, the Gospel of Mark, and my personal favourite, was written down around 70. But it's also now the scholarly consensus that these texts were edited, re-edited, in the second, third, fourth centuries, such that what emerged out of the second century edits was very different from what was originally written down. As such, her argument is that regardless of the earliest date and composition, the text reframed in the second century to consciously create a sense of an organised Christian church in the first century, which broadly speaking did not actually exist.
I do.
Of course, someone trying to argue against this framing of early Christian history could bring up a range of different sources that contradict Walsh's argument. She predicts this argument and heads it off.
Goddamn.
Take the example of St. Paul. Surely his epistles or letters point towards an organised Christian church, albeit a small one, in the middle of the first century. Walsh presents an interesting counter-argument, what she calls the hero Paul theory. If we take the 6 or 7 Pauline letters that are now generally accepted to have actually been written by Paul, he was essentially trying to present himself within these as sort of the hero of the early Christian movement, the man going around the Greek East building up the church in places like Antioch, Galatia and Corinth, owing to the way in which he speaks about an emergent ecclesia or church. Christian scholars have been understandably inclined to view writings as evidence that there was an organised Christian church at this time. But Walsh argues that these scholars are far too willing to accept Paul's presentation of himself as a kind of early Christian hero.
Idealized portrayal of his audience as a community bounded by shared pneuma, participation in Christ, and moral perfection is accepted as genuine or actual.
What Walsh is suggesting is that Paul created the idea that there were distinct Christian churches or communities in the Greek East by the 50s and 60s to make it appear as though he was the hero who established the Christian communities through his energetic missionary work. Conversely, Walsh argues it's highly unlikely that there was anything resembling a kind of organised church in the first century in Corinth. So where does this all leave us? In effect, what Walsh is arguing is that the idea that there was a cohesive, unified Christian church in the first century is basically a myth. For her, the church emerged gradually in the second century amongst educated Greeks in the Eastern Mediterranean. The writers of the Synoptic Gospels, Acts of the Apostles, and other parts of the New Testament, along with non-canonical Christian texts of the time, were basically inventing a backstory for their movement. There was nothing unusual about this. Indeed, as Walsh notes, it would be out of the ordinary if ancient Christians had been trying to build up some historically accurate account of the lives of Jesus, the Apostles, and the earliest Christians like Paul. This is not how ancient history was written. It was a literary discipline in ancient times, and objectively accurate historical facts were almost never allowed to get in the way of a bloody good story. If we follow this line, then the history of Christianity prior to 150 basically became a place where fact and fiction were impossible to distinguish from one another. We are left with a literary construct, myth, rather than anything approaching a historical church. And perhaps not everyone will agree with this approach. It could be argued that in an effort to be original, to find those diamonds in the dunghill, as it is memorably put in the book, Walsh has gone for too eclectic an approach. Indeed, historians for quite some time now have argued that the New Testament emerged out of Greek intellectuals in the Eastern Mediterranean that was very different to what the founders of Christianity were actually like. These founders were, if we accept that there was at least some kernel of truth to what was written in the New Testament, largely illiterate Jewish fishermen from Galilee. I guess what marks out Walsh's thesis as being distinct is how far she takes this argument, essentially viewing the New Testament and works like the Acts of the Apostles as literary works with little or no historical reliability. in that sense, perhaps a work leaves us with even more questions than answers.
I cursed the Holy Ghost right out in the game.
You guys actually read Walsh's book? If so, what did you think? Were you persuaded by her arguments, or did you find the reliance on literary comparisons unhelpful from the perspective of traditional historical analysis?
I would the Holy Ghost can go to hell if I don't win this game.
And also, do you ever actually question whether Jesus existed at all?
I do.
If so, I've solved that problem for you. Check out the pop-up link. Alright, thanks for watching. Catch you in the next one. See you later.
Complex. Haters of the hate, but I never feel pressed. Got a lot on my plate, but I never get stressed.
Time period where it does not belong as this content creator inappropriately does.
Where's the evidence? Both inhospitality and homosexuality are irreconcilably at odds. Who says Genesis 19 does not convey multiple offenses? So the right question is not what is Sodom's sin, rather what are Sodom's sins?
They can all be subsumed under the conceptual umbrella of inhospitality in reference to social justice and how your society is treating the poor and the needy and the vulnerable and the outsider. That's why scholars are comfortable saying the sin was inhospitality. Because everything Ezekiel says, everything Genesis 19 says, everything everybody says about Sodom and Gomorrah falls under that general umbrella of inhospitality.
Number two. Sodom's sins were more than just inhospitality. In Genesis 13, verse 13, we're told, the men of Sodom were wicked, great sinners against the Lord. The Hebrew Bible reserved wicked, great sinners to only one group of people, the men of Sodom and no one else.
This doesn't really mean much, particularly when we've already seen there's a parallel story where the men of Gibeah, the men of the tribe of Benjamin, do the exact same thing, but they actually succeed in sexually assaulting and killing someone in the process.
In Genesis 18, verse 20, God proclaims the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and their sin is very grave. Sodom's sins were not trivial or small, but great and very grave.
Yes, and mistreatment of the poor and the orphan and the widow and the foreigner and outsiders was considered a very grave sin in a time and a place where many people's lives were dependent upon being treated with care when they were not in their hometown. And so that doesn't really make the point for you. But bringing up this passage in Genesis 18 also raises another question. Because if there are victims of this very grave sin, then that could explain why there is an outcry that rises up to God. Because there are victims of the mistreatment of the poor and the orphan and the needy and the outsider, including victims of things like sexual assault. But if the gravest sin is just men having sex with each other, and it has nothing to do with sexual assault, it's consensual, where is the outcry coming from? Who is crying out to God about this sin? It's not the men's wives, because when Sodom was destroyed, it didn't say all their wives got out scot-free. They were all killed too if there were any women in the town. So who is it? If there is a great outcry that rises up to God, it has to come from either the blood of the victims or the victims. That's what generally happens when there's great outcry that comes up to God. So who are the victims? If the gravest sin you can think of is men having sex with each other.
Jesus.
Consensual.
Christ.
Because if it's not consensual, then what is the real sin? Is it just that it's sex between two men? Or is it that one man is sexually assaulting another?
The Bible repeatedly states that Sodom wasn't solely guilty of inhospitality. In Ezekiel 16, verse 49, many sins were mentioned along with inhospitality, such as pride, gluttony, and laziness.
So here this content creator is trying to make it sound like Ezekiel 49 is immediately just rattling off a list of sins. Pride, gluttony, laziness, did not help the poor and the needy.
Stupid! Suck my slut!
That is probably not what's going on in Ezekiel's rhetoric. And this content creator is relying on, one, a specific translation, and two, a specific interpretation of that translation to do the work for them. So the content creator's translation says pride, excess of food, and prosperous ease. Does that sound like three sins being rattled off? A little bit. But let's take a look at another translation. This is the New English translation, the NET. I think there are times when the NET actually picks up on some of the nuances that a lot of translations miss.
Stupid!
There are
Kiss that
when the
record
NET
by
does an
slant
awful
that
job,
slut.
particularly in the footnotes. But that's not what this is about.
I'm fixing
This
that.
is what the
Yeah,
translation
you're
says.
right.
See here, this is the iniquity of your sister Sodom. She and her daughter had majesty, abundance of food, and enjoyed carefree ease. But they did not help the poor and needy. So here, the rhetorical point seems to be to contrast the privileged position of the people of Sodom over and against their refusal to help the poor and the needy. And I actually think that's what's going on here. Because the word for pride does not necessarily have to do only with a sinful degree of pridefulness. It can refer to majesty, it can refer to splendor. It is used frequently in reference to God in precisely that way. And so this content creator would prefer that you think that the author of Ezekiel is just rattling off a list of sins, including pride and gluttony and laziness. But I think it's more likely that the author here is setting the table to expose the contrast between the fact that this city had everything they could ever want and more, and yet refused to help the poor and the needy. And so this content creator is having the presupposition of specific interpretations carry a lot of the load for their argument, and they're not letting you know that's what's going on. There are other interpretive options for this passage, which maintain the point that scholars try to make here, which is that everything that's ever said about Sodom and Gomorrah falls under that umbrella of inhospitality, or more specifically, the umbrella of not maintaining social and cosmic justice and order as you are expected to, which was considered monumentally important in this time and place, as we have already seen with the parallel story from Judges 19.
Jude, verse 7, states that Sodom indulged in sexual immorality.
So two things to say about this appeal to Jude, verse 7. Threatening outsiders with lethal sexual assaults is sexual immorality. So this is a distinction without a difference here. To say, well, Jude says they were engaged in sexual immorality does not mean they were not engaged in that inhospitality. But also notice that this content creator stopped right there, because the verse goes on and says, and pursued sarcos heteros, other flesh, which is usually translated unnatural lust or desire or something like that. And usually that is that people specifically point to as indicating same-sex desire, homosexual orientation, the fact that this is about homosexuality. And this content creator stopped before getting to that. And I think it's because they know that would actually hit their points. Because sarkos heteros literally means other flesh. Heteros is the same word that we get hetero from. And the other flesh was not homosexual sex. The other flesh was humans having sex with angels. Because
Amen.
Jude verse 6 is talking about angels leaving their first estate and being chained and bound for judgment. This is First Enoch. Jude verse 6 is talking about First Enoch. Later in the chapter, Jude is actually going to directly quote from First Enoch. But here, the reference is to the angels from First Enoch, which is riffing on Genesis 6, where they came down and they had children, offspring with human women. That's angelic human intercourse. That's inappropriate. And then verse 7, with another part that this content creator didn't quote, where it says, and in like manner to them. The men of Sodom and Gomorrah engaged in sexual immorality and pursued other flesh. How is that in like manner to the angels of First Enoch? Well, it crosses that species boundary that is not supposed to be violated. So the sexual immorality that Jude 7 is representing as in like manner to what the angels of First Enoch did inappropriately is precisely the violation of that boundary between human and angel. And so what was the sexual immorality according to Jude verse 7? It was men trying to have sex with angels. That's the concern for the author of Jude. That does not serve the rhetorical point of this content creator. And this content creator, I think, tried to limit what they were quoting to the part they thought would help, and excluded the rest of the context, which really demonstrates pretty conclusively that Jude verse 7 does not help their point.
In Jeremiah 23, verse 14, God linked the sin of adultery with Sodom and Jerusalem.
Again, this content creator is misleading by omitting context. Here is the full verse, but in the prophets of Jerusalem I have seen a more shocking thing. They commit adultery and walk in lies. They strengthen the hands of evildoers so that no one turns from wickedness. All of them have become like Sodom to me, and its inhabitants like Gomorrah. Now, does this necessarily mean that every last thing that they did is something that was done in Sodom and Gomorrah? Of course not. What it means is that they are very, very wicked. They are like people that I am not going to tolerate anymore. And the passage goes on to threaten them with destruction. So they are like the cities that I destroy. So the comparison is not saying that, Sodom and Gomorrah's sin was primarily sexual and not a matter of hospitality. That's laughably off base here. The point here is to rattle off a number of things that these prophets in Jerusalem are doing bad and saying, just like I had to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah because they were so wicked, the prophets in Jerusalem have become so wicked. It is not saying the sins are identical.
Clearly, Sodom's sins were many.
And apart from Jude's idiosyncratic reinterpretation of what was going on in Genesis 19 through the interpretive lens of First Enoch's representation of angelic/human intercourse, all of the representations of Sodom and Gomorrah's sins fit under the umbrella of hospitality or the maintenance of social and cosmic justice and order.
But is there clear evidence that homosexuality was among Sodom's many sins? Yes. Which brings us to our last point. Number 3. God lists homosexuality as one of Sodom's many sins. In Ezekiel 16, verse 49 to 50, God spoke in the first person through the prophet Ezekiel, listing pride, gluttony, laziness, and inhospitality. Behold, this was the guilt of her sister Sodom. She and her daughters had pride, excess of food, and prosperous ease, but did not aid the poor and needy. They were haughty and did an abomination before me, so I removed them when I saw it. Gay activists will misuse this passage to purport that the sin of Sodom was inhospitality, conceding the other sins like pride, gluttony, and laziness, but ignoring what follows.
I certainly don't concede those other sins. I think that's a bad interpretation of that passage in Ezekiel 16. All of the things that Ezekiel is talking about fall under the umbrella of inhospitality, including the to'evah, including the abomination. Even if you say this has to be a reference to Leviticus 18 and Leviticus 20, guess what? Threatening outside male visitors with lethal sexual assault fits perfectly with what is prohibited in Leviticus 18 and Leviticus 20. And it doesn't necessarily have to have anything to do with a homosexual orientation. It's not about the same-sexness. It is about the violation of a man's position at the apex of that socially conventionalized hierarchy of domination and penetration. So the point there is not to say, ooh, they were gay. The point is to say, ooh, they engaged in the most abominable kind of inhospitable treatment we can think of, which is they threatened a male visitor, an outsider, a guest in someone's home, with lethal sexual assault. And it has to be men doing it to other men, because if they're doing it to women, it's not as big a deal. Because women were not at the top of that hierarchy, and women did not have sexual agency of their own. And it had to be men doing it to them, because men are the only real sexual agents, and the notion that women would do it would have just been laughable in the ancient world. It had to be men doing it to other men for it to be maximally egregious and grave and sinful. And it wasn't because they thought the idea of a man being sexually attracted to another man was the ickiest thing that ever icked.
It is
because that violated their hierarchy of domination and penetration and the standards that they had for not just sexual propriety, but more saliently, how you're supposed to treat outsiders, how you're supposed to maintain social and cosmic justice and order.
In verse 50, God lists two more sins. They were haughty and did an abomination before me. Haughtiness is being arrogant and disdainful.
Yes, and that explains their refusal to aid the poor and the needy. Their refusal to treat the outsider, the guest in someone else's home with hospitality. That fits perfectly into the inhospitality reading.
The next phrase may not be as familiar to us as to Ezekiel, a priest well acquainted with the law of Moses. The phrase in Ezekiel 16 verse 50, did an abomination, is made up of two Hebrew words taken from Leviticus 20 verse 13, one of the main laws condemning homosexuality. If a man lies with a male as with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination. Did and committed are from the same Hebrew verb, asah, and abomination comes from the Hebrew word tovah. This is called a cross-reference. Did you know that the Bible is full of cross-references? Nearly 64,000. A cross-reference can be a quote or pulling keywords from another verse. Old Testament and New Testament authors love to cross-reference other Old Testament and New Testament authors. This upholds Scripture's unity and integrity. The Old and the New, something gay activists reject.
Frequently, cross-references actually demonstrate a lack of unity, as we see in Jude's idiosyncratic interpretation of what's going on in Genesis 19 through the light of First Enoch. Jude understands it completely differently from the way Ezekiel understands it. But the notion that Ezekiel here is engaged in an allusion to Leviticus 20 doesn't really undermine anything, as I've already pointed out. Leviticus 18 and 20 are not describing necessarily, and I don't think at all, consensual male same-sex intercourse. Because I don't think they really treated that as a salient phenomenon. What Leviticus 18 prohibits is precisely the one taking the insertive role from taking the insertive role in an act of male same-sex intercourse. Leviticus 20, probably by a later author, is then coming through and saying both parties are punished across all of the sexual activity that is prohibited in that chapter, and then imposing penalties on both partners in all cases. And consent is never once addressed. And in fact, it even imposes the death penalty on the animal in the case of bestiality, whether it's a man or a woman engaging in the act. The animal is killed as well. And there's an argument to be had here for whether or not the author understands both parties to have been consenting, Or if the idea is the act itself, irrespective of consent, generates a kind of metaphysical contamination that gets out on the land, and the only way to purge that is to kill both participants in the act. Like, the fact that these laws are intended to mitigate or counteract that contamination process is pretty explicitly laid out at the end of both Leviticus 18 and 20, where the point is to make it so the land is not contaminated, but is purged of that contamination, because if the contamination reaches a critical mass, the land must vomit you out. It has no choice. And so I think the argument is stronger that what's going on here is that both parties have to be punished in order for the contaminant to be purged from the land, and we just don't really care about consent, because consent of the submissive, of the receptive partner, whether a man or a woman, wasn't really at issue. So even if this is a cross-reference, it doesn't really change much. But at the same time, Toeva always occurs with the verb root asa when somebody is said to be engaging in a Toeva. And in Ezekiel 16:49, the verb comes first, asa first, and then Toeva.
Stupid!
It is Toeva that comes first and asa that comes later.
Stupid.
And Ezekiel uses asa in conjunction with Toeva multiple times, usually with the verb before, and then once or twice with the verb after, in describing a variety of different things that aren't necessarily connected to Leviticus 18 and Leviticus 20. And there are other places in the Hebrew Bible where asa and toeva occur in conjunction in reference to things that are not related to Leviticus 18 and Leviticus 20. So that argument isn't really as strong as this content creator seems to think it is. But even if it is a cross-reference, and I think it probably is, it doesn't really change much. Again, because this content creator is misrepresenting not only what's going on in Leviticus 18 and Leviticus 20, but also in Ezekiel 16 and also in Genesis 19.
Furthermore, every time the Bible mentions the act of sex, a euphemism is used. Did you know that the Bible does not have an explicit word for sex? Does this mean ancient Israelites didn't know what sex was? Of course not. Other euphemisms were used, like to know, to lay, or to see one's nakedness. I'm sure you've heard it purported that the word homosexual was not in the Bible. But the absence of a word does not mean the absence of a concept.
If we're using homosexual to mean a person with a homosexual orientation, which is the majority use of the word, then yes, that concept was absent as well. Our notion of homosexual orientation
I'm thinking of those poems. I'm thinking of
with how they reasoned in the ancient world about the fact that there were people who sought out intercourse with members of their own sex. So to the degree we understand homosexual to refer to a person with a homosexual orientation, the concept is also absent from the Bible.
I created another video where I refute this myth here. With no specific word for sex,
I got
it's
one word
that other words are used to communicate the act of homosexuality in the Old Testament. In this case, did or committed an abomination was a euphemism for the sin of homosexuality.
There's absolutely no evidence that this is a euphemism for male same-sex intercourse specifically and in and of itself. Every other time it occurs in Ezekiel, it seems to be used appositionally to refer to either adultery or idolatry. And the same is true of its use elsewhere, in Isaiah, in Jeremiah, and elsewhere. And again, even if we do understand it as a reference to Leviticus 20, verse 13, there's absolutely nothing about the story in Genesis 19 or in Judges 19 where the idea is, ooh, gross, gay stuff, rather than the idea being, ooh, gross, a man tried to sexually assault another man to death, where the primary concern is the violation of the other man and his status at the top of that hierarchy of domination and penetration. So the notion that Genesis 19 is about inhospitality and is about inappropriately and egregiously threatening male visitors with lethal sexual assault fits perfectly into what is being prohibited in Leviticus 18 and Leviticus 20. We don't need to understand it as saying, ooh, gross gay stuff. There are other larger violations going on. That is very clearly what the focus of both Genesis 19 and Judges 19 are.
Thus, it was God himself speaking through the prophet Ezekiel, connecting the sin of Sodom with the sin of homosexuality mentioned in Leviticus 20, verse 13. Scripture interprets Scripture.
No, it doesn't. That just presupposes homosexuality, and there are no data that support that. But even if we do allow the interpretation of Ezekiel 16:49 to be informed by Leviticus 18 and Leviticus 20, my reading and the consensus reading of scholars is not at all undermined.
So the next time you hear homosexuality was not Sodom's sin and hospitality was, remember these 3 points. Number 1, this is a classic false dilemma fallacy. Number 2, Sodom's sins were more than just in hospitality. Number 3, God lists homosexuality as one of Sodom's many sins. For the naked truth, I'm Christopher Beaumont.
Or you could grow the hell up and you could get over this petty and ignorant bigotry. And you, Christopher, can do so much better. Because we can look in the same Hebrew Bible and even in the New Testament, and we can find God condoning and in some places even endorsing slavery. And most of the world, 150, 175 years ago, we decided, you know what? We reject that. We overruled the Bible. We overruled God. And we decided we were all going to accept this new understanding where, you know what? We're going to find ways to understand the Bible as secretly actually being against slavery the entire time, so that we don't have to believe in a God who endorses slavery. And now you certainly accept the notion that God does not approve of slavery or things like polygamy. But those things are very clearly condoned and even endorsed in the Bible.
What?
So the Bible is ultimately not the arbiter of our morality. No matter how much you want that to be the case, how you argue that to be the case, how much you believe that.
Look at this motherfucking shit. Suck my
Generation ships you propose. Let them live and die aboard the vessel. Their distant descendants will arrive. Have you observed human nature? Confine 500 individuals inside a metallic cylinder for 500 years. Social structures will disintegrate.
Suck my dick, bitch. Suck my motherfucking dick. Man, what a crock of shit. Suck my dick, bitch. You suck my dick, bitch.
Just how far down she was. So she was, and this is going to be important. It's just the only reason I'm telling you about this, because you'll see how it'll affect the next chapter.
Dick.
She would use meth and then Subutex, which is like Suboxone methadone. So she would shoot that up. I ended up doing that, and then she started smoking meth too. And I found out just recently, just a couple months ago, from someone that knew her during and before that time, that she was smoking meth beforehand. She told me she had just started. This whole time, she had a or most of this time, she had a warrant out for arrest for a failure to appear, because part of her deal with living with this woman was she was getting color-coded and had to go see a probation officer. She had to keep in contact with Corey, and she stopped doing that. And so, after we were together for about 3 months, she goes off on a meth bender. I realize she's been sleeping with these other guys to get drugs. And so I'm distraught. She ends up messaging me after ghosting me for a couple of days.
Ghosting.
And she tells me that she's going to come over to my house. She's going to get her stuff, and Mom's going to pick her up and do all this. And she's going to turn herself into jail. Because she's... I'll find out later she's coming down off of the meth, and she's absolutely paranoid. She's like, I just need to rip the Band-Aid off and get this over with. So she turns herself into jail. And this is January of 2018. So, on my birthday of that year, I would have been 23.
Dick.
I nearly committed suicide because it was right after all this happened. And I started texting random people saying goodbye. And I stuck a gun to my head. And I was about to pull the trigger when one of the friends I texted started calling me. And I answered the phone. And it's because we had talked about our mental health struggles and struggling with depression and suicidal thoughts. So she knew, even though there were other people that didn't catch that what I meant when I was saying goodbye, she knew what I meant. And I answered the phone, and she says, don't do it. And I dropped the gun, and I'm just weeping.
You needed that. Yeah.
I did. And
suck my motherfucking
she came over, she grabbed like fried chicken,
suck
and we
my
ate and talked
suck
about
my damn suck my dick.
She helped me for a little while.
Suck my motherfucking dick.
With that. But I continued to spiral. I didn't stop talking to the girl I was with. I put money on a phone card for her, and I talked to her in jail. I would go visit her.
Suck my motherfucking dick.
And it was because I thought that we were supposed to be, like, that my interpretation of the events was that God had put her in my life because God is constantly orchestrating things. And that we messed up by sinning. Because she lived with me for 2.5 months, two and a half months. So, like, we started having sex. And that's when I lost my virginity. Was at almost 23.
Also, just to add this in, you're almost 23, like you said. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I think this is important. You can also factor in, you're a virgin, dude, and this girl took it. And so, like, if people are going, why are you such a knucklehead, and, she did all this stuff, it's like, look, the girl who took that sacred thing that was very valuable to you as a Christian, that you held on to for all the years in high school, and you were dating other girls that you never did this with, your attachment to her was clearly significant because, she took your virginity. Okay, so you're visiting her in jail. She's done a lot of things. You're also a forgiving guy. You've got a lot of gentleness in your heart. This is somebody important to you. You clearly felt distraught when all this happened. You wanted to take your own life, and someone helped you make it through that. So you're visiting her in jail. How does this all lead towards the overall theme of you no longer believing in Jesus? You know what I mean?
It gets worse and worse there.
Okay, well, let's hear it.
I kept... A few years ago, this is just kind of an aside, after I converted, I found Jordan Peterson, and this was before he got really right-wing. It was some of his earlier work, and he did this series on the Bible that was a psychological perspective of, like,
Carl Jung.
Yes, and I really liked that. There's a line he said in that that really applies to what's about to happen in my story. It's always a bottomless pit because there's always something that some stupid son of a bitch like you can do to dig deeper, right? Like, you can just keep going further. Dumbass. Okay, so like I said, my interpretation was like we were living in sin and stuff. God's discipline, and that we needed to get our acts together. That's how I started interpreting it.
You suck, right? Cock.
I lost my job because I was drinking so much that I wasn't coming to work. I lost the house I was renting because I couldn't afford to pay rent.
That's fucked up.
I ended up moving back in with my mother and her current husband, and they're both addicts. And when I lost my job from drinking, I was like, I've got to stop. Like, I can't do this anymore because it's making everything worse. And so I'm living with them. They're drinking, they're smoking weed, they're popping pills. And I'm trying to get this girl into rehab. She's asked for my help to do that. So I'm trying to get a hold of $400 to get her to rehab. I'm trying to get myself sober. I'm trying to get a new job. I'm trying to sell all the stuff that's sitting in the front room of my mom's house so that it's not sitting there and bothering her, and so that I can get some cash flow and get things moving again. I get a job as a temp in a different factory. I reach out to someone I used to be related to through marriage. And
God damn it.
That's a tangent. But from my point of view, this person owed me money. And I think that's still probably justifiable, but we won't go into that story. He agrees to pay me $200.
God damn it.
That's the other half I need to get her into rehab. So I come to court with that money.
Spit.
They do whatever paperwork. They get her into this Christian rehabilitation program in Birmingham. So she goes that way. I continue to talk to this guy that gave me the money, and he wants to try and disciple me. Those are his words. And I'm open to it because, like, I need all the help I can get right now. And like I said, I believe that God's disciplining me. So, like, from my point of view, that's the answer. Is I need to reestablish my relationship with God. I need to dig in, try harder, do better, study longer, pray more, all that. And he tells me, because I call him one day and I'm like, man, it sucks living here because they're constantly high and I'm sober and I feel like I'm on fire. Like, I feel like I'm itching. Like, I'm trying not to
now
use
fuck
drugs.
up and take that night with your ass. I can Donkey Kong the fuck out of you.
He pauses and he's like, listen. How about you come and stay with me and my wife? And he had two small kids at the time. I'll disciple you. I'll try and help you get back on your feet. I'll help you reestablish your relationship with Christ. And the only condition is you need to quit your job because this was another swing shift being at a factory. And come work with me.
Fucking factory. Fuck.
At the time, I was like, okay, that'll work.
What a crock of
Looking back
shit.
on that last bit, it was like,
Suck my motherfucking dick.
I can't think of a word, but that seems a little manipulative now, looking back, and I'll get more into that, but he had a small business construction company at the time, and it was just him, his part, like his business partner,
blue collar working
and then one other guy, and he said, now me. I think he needed help. Personally, so I think there was definitely some selfish motive going on there. But I do think that in his mind he was thinking that I'm going to help Chris out. I'm going to do what I'm supposed to do as a man of God. I'm going to train him up to be a better man. And so I lived with him for about a month. This is now
Suck my fucking cock.
March of that same year.
Suck my
So it's a couple months after me almost killing myself.
Suck my cock.
And I'm still talking to this girl.
Cock. Suck
Every
my
chance I get.
cock.
and she has to call me because she's in jail.
Suck my motherfucking cock.
So most of the time when I see her calling, I pick up the phone and I talk to her, and I'm trying to encourage her.
Suck my motherfucking cock.
It wasn't until
Suck my cock.
the end of March or April that she actually got into this rehabilitation program.
Bitch, you suck my cock.
While
Suck
I'm
my
there
black cock. You suck my cock.
with this guy, we do some Bible studies. He takes me to his church. He's trying to get me ingrained in like their Sunday school and their Wednesday night Bible study. And this is only a few weeks, though, so it doesn't
Bitch,
last
you
very
suck
long.
my goddamn dick.
And he confronts me one day.
Bitch, you suck
evening.
my goddamn dick. Bitch, you suck my goddamn
And
dick. You suck my
he says to me,
bitch. You suck my
Listen,
goddamn
we gotta talk.
bitch. You suck my goddamn dick.
and
bitch.
he's like,
You
why
suck my
are you
goddamn
still
dick.
talking to this girl? Because
You
and
suck
this is the
my
funny
goddamn
thing is
dick.
I was
Bitch,
so
you suck my
frustrated
goddamn
at the time that he
bitch.
was
You suck my
questioning me.
goddamn
I
dick.
see
Bitch,
now,
you
despite
suck my goddamn dick. You
some
suck
of
my
his
goddamn
unhealthy
dick.
beliefs,
Bitch,
that
you
he
suck
could see
goddamn
my
dick.
relationship
You suck my
situation
goddamn
more clearly than I
dick.
could.
You suck my
He
goddamn
knew
dick.
that like this was
You
not
suck
a
my
good fit,
goddamn
and that
dick.
we
Bitch,
needed
you
to
suck
just
my goddamn
end
dick.
it.
Bitch, you
But
suck
his
my
way of doing
goddamn
that
dick.
wasn't
Bitch,
the
you
most
suck my goddamn
understanding.
dick. You suck
So he
my
sat me
goddamn
down.
dick.
He's like, I just
Bitch,
don't
you suck my
understand.
goddamn dick.
It's like, is
Bitch,
the pussy
you
just
suck
that
my
good, Chris?
goddamn
And
dick.
I was kind of shocked. His
Bitch,
wife's
you suck
sitting
my
there.
dick.
She yells his name. She's like, you know, why are you saying that? And
You
I
suck my
understand
goddamn
now,
dick, bitch.
but I was very taken aback. And he said, listen, you need to stop talking to her. And this is, he's like, this is the way I see it.
Suck
You
my
stay with us
goddamn cock.
for another 6 months to a year.
Suck my cock.
You don't talk to her at all during that time. Or I can call this relative I have and give him hope retreat.
And you
And
can
we can
keep your
get you
ass.
put into the discipleship training program down there.
Suck my cock.
And this is where it's like,
Suck my
I traded the shovel for a backhoe, and I'm just digging myself into a pit without realizing it.
Hold on. So you have a choice. You're such a knucklehead. Obviously, you have a choice between not talking to this girl and just being able to continue living where you're at and just take this guy's advice because he's letting you live with him, right?
Suck.
Or you go to a disciple thing and you chose that instead of staying with this guy.
You suck dick.
He had been talking it up over the month that I had lived with him
Hamming it up.
because he struggled with addiction. And he had relapsed a year or two before this.
I see a
He
dick
went
in your
there for
future.
a few
I
months
see a
and came
dick.
back, and he kept talking about
I see a dick in your future. I see a dick.
with Christ, and that
I
he was on
see
fire,
a dick
he
in
was
your future.
trying to go to
I
war
see a
with the
dick.
devil, and
I see a
he would
dick.
use a lot of verbiage like this, like he was a crusader. And at the time, I was
I
just
see a dick in your future. I see a dick. Dick
and
dick. Suck my.
So you went though.
yes.
Okay.
Because
I fucking.
I felt convicted. I felt like maybe this is what God is asking of me. It's like to really lay it out on the line and trust Him and dive in. Right.
Well, that's kind of how our minds work, right? We're living it out, and we're trying to look for signs that make sense. Here's another sign, right? The girl enters your life. Okay, the girl exits your life. Or
Dick.
she's in jail. That's part of the sign. This guy bringing in. That's part of the sign. Well, this guy says,
Stupid!
doing that. So you're
Because that
going.
was
You go to
stupid.
practically like a boot camp for Jesus.
Home.
I can already.
Stupid.
This has got to be hell. So
The stupid
I went through this
machine.
experience in this boot camp. I can't imagine
What a
this was not a hellhole that you're like, damn, dude. You
hell
really
hole.
sold me on like one of the worst places to go to. Tell me. I want to know though. So what happens?
Thankfully, I can laugh now, but no, absolutely, I had that experience. So this is in Lacombe,
He was a good sport, but he was a poor
about
player.
6 hour drive.
He was a dumbass.
I think like 5 to 6 hour drive. It's on the north shore of Lake Pontchartrain. It's a rural area.
Right.
This is a former boys' summer camp. I think it was KBRB.
I want
what
a
it was
piece.
called. But this ministry, the New Orleans mission, bought this place. And
But we're gonna eat one
so now
tomorrow.
we're gonna get
I
part
don't
of
want
the
to
story
get
where
fat.
you're gonna hear me say like the word allegedly a few times and things like that because they're partnered with the court systems down there, and I don't have the money to defend myself in a lawsuit.
This is boring.
Okay.
This is a place
This is
where
boring.
they have a
This is
men's
boring.
discipleship training program and a women's discipleship training program. The men's is at Giving Hope Retreat, and now they've expanded their operation. There's at least one more campus. I'm not sure what that's called. I haven't done a deep dive into
Suck
that
my
because I
motherfucking dick.
am trying to just distance myself as much as possible
Suck my dick, bitch.
from that place. But
You suck my dick, bitch. You suck my dick.
the women's campuses is
Suck my dick.
like I want to say about a 40-minute drive from the men's. It's even further from the New Orleans mission, and they are. So, like I said, they call it a discipleship training program.
That whore.
A religious rehabilitation program, a drug rehabilitation program, or
Fucking.
a program for
You suck.
homeless people to get off the streets of New Orleans and to try and get their lives back together. So there were some people that were court sentenced to be there, Eric, and instead of a secular rehabilitation program, where people that had committed drug crimes,
That happens a lot, but as you know, there's going to be a ton of the courts are even dependent on whatever sources they have, and they're not sending them to like high-priced, secular, rehabilitation centers and whatnot programs. They're looking for like Christian camps that are organized with the government to help people get clean and stuff. And it's like, they're organized with 12-step camps even, for example. And I've been to 12-step, as you know, we've probably both been in and out of AA, all that. Even then, you go to the meeting, you go up to the person who's running it, chairing it, hey, can you sign my slip? Cool, I was here at the meeting today. They're forced to kind of go as part of the court thing. This is obviously a little more severe than just going to 12-step. You have to mandatorily go. And not the greatest people in the world are appearing in these camps either because, a lot of them have all sorts of other problems they need help with. And go in there, Jesus isn't going to cure them, I imagine.
I don't
But
give a
okay,
shit.
let's hear about the camp. Let's hear what happens.
Not
get
that type of help.
And I'll back up just briefly. We had a going away party.
They can suck my motherfucking goddamn cock.
I still don't have the closest relationship with my father. We're slowly working on that, but just to remind everyone, my mom had custody of me for most of my childhood. So my dad wanted to be there. He had his own struggles he was dealing with, and he didn't have custody. So
Suck my dick, bitch.
he comes to this
Suck my
going away party,
Suck my dick.
and he stops at one point. He stops everyone, and kind of makes a scene that I wish I had took more seriously at the time. And he stops.
This is boring. This is boring. This is
Why is
boring.
my son suddenly going to this place, right? And at the time, I thought, like, oh, he's just kind of ignorant. He doesn't understand that, like, this is where God's sending me. So, anyway, we talk about it, and he just accepts that's my decision. He doesn't agree with it, but he's like, I'll support you.
Man, this is boring as fuck. You suck my motherfucking goddamn dick, you goddamn son of a goddamn bitch. You suck my dick, bitch. You suck my...
2 billion people call the Bible the perfect, inerrant Word of God. And that Bible says God, personally, with his own voice on a mountain, dictated the exact blueprints for one object. Every measurement, every material, the gold plating, the angels on top, down to the cubit. Like an architect sliding drawings across a table to a contractor and saying, build exactly this. And that object, the Ark of the Covenant, became the most sacred thing any religion has ever possessed. The thing in the center of the room so holy that one human being could enter it once a year. And if he got the ritual wrong, he just dropped dead right there on the floor in front of God. And I need you to hear this, because this is the thing that broke it open for me. That object, the one God supposedly designed himself, the Bible describes it twice. 2 different books. And the 2 descriptions don't match. They're not even in the same universe. One version, golden throne, angels on top, built by a master craftsman God handpicked for the job. The other, same Bible, same God, supposedly same story. Moses just throws together a wooden box with his bare hands. No gold, no angels,
Kiss that bishop goodbye.
wood, stone tablets, done.
Stupid.
And I sat with that for,
This stupid
honestly,
machine
it was a while before I could even say it out loud.
Stupid!
Because once you see it, the phrase, the Word of God, just, it lands differently after that. It does. There's no going back to the way it sounded before. 7 lies. 7 things you were taught about the Ark of the Covenant that are not true. That collapse the second you put 2 pages of the same Bible on the same table. And the evidence? I really need you to get this. The evidence has been sitting in your own copy this entire time. In the book on your shelf. In the app on your phone. Right there. Wide open.
Just waiting for somebody to turn the damn page.
So let's open them both.
Because that's the one thing nobody at the front of the room ever did for you. Here's lie number 1. And it's the big one, so stay with me. You were taught that God designed one ark, one set of blueprints, one sacred object. That's not what the Bible says. Let's start with the version you already know, the one they taught you. Exodus 25. God is on the mountain with Moses. And what comes out of God's mouth isn't some loose suggestion like, build me something nice. It's a spec sheet. I mean, it reads genuinely like an engineering document somebody would submit to a general contractor. Verse 10. Have them make an ark of acacia wood, 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide, 1.5 cubits high, roughly 4 feet by 2.5 by 2.5. Then verse 11. Overlay it with pure gold, both inside and out, and make a gold molding around it. Inside and out. God wants the inside of the box, the part nobody is ever going to see, plated in gold. Then the mercy seat, verse 17. A solid slab of pure gold for the lid. Then the cherubim, verse 18. 2 of them, hammered gold, wings spread, facing each other across the mercy seat, gold rings on the corners, gold-plated wooden poles for carrying, and then verse 22. This is the whole point of the thing. There, above the cover between the 2 cherubim, I will meet with you. God is designing his own throne room. Out loud, personally, every detail down to the molding around the edge. And who builds it? Not Moses. God picks a craftsman named Bezalel, Exodus 31. Fills him with, quote, the Spirit of God, with wisdom, with understanding, with knowledge, and with all kinds of skills. Full divine appointment. God selects the builder by name. Moses doesn't touch the construction. Moses carries the message. Bezalel does the work. That's the ark you grew up with. The golden chest, the wings, the thing from the movie, from the flannel board, from whatever painting your grandparents had hanging in the hallway next to the bathroom. Version 1. Now flip to Deuteronomy 10. Same Bible, supposedly same Moses, same God. And Moses is talking. Verse 1. At that time the Lord said to me, Chisel out 2 stone tablets like the first ones, and come up to me on the mountain. Also, make an ark of wood. An ark of wood? Just make a box out of wood. That's it. That's what God says. Verse 3. So I made the ark out of acacia wood, and chiseled out 2 stone tablets like the first ones. And I went up on the mountain with the 2 tablets in my hand. I made the ark. Moses himself, with his hands, a wooden box. Tablets went in, and that's all you get. That's the whole description. No gold, no cherubim, no mercy seat, no Bezalel. No rings, no poles, no molding, no divine craftsmanship, no nothing. A man and a box and 2 rocks. I want you to sit with that for a second. Because the question this raises isn't some deep theological brain teaser you need a seminary degree to untangle. A 10-year-old could ask it. Did God design a gold throne with sculpted angel statues? Or did God say, make a wooden box? Because a wooden box is not a gold-plated throne with angels on the lid. Those are different objects. Physically different. Made by different people. Described differently. And they're both sitting in the same Bible that 2 billion people call the perfect, inerrant, divinely inspired Word of God. Now, I know the apologetic move. I've read every flavor of it. Moses made a quick temporary box on the mountain just to hold the tablets, and then later Bezalel built the real permanent gold one. Alright, sounds reasonable for about 5 seconds. Until you read Deuteronomy 10:5, where Moses says, and I'm quoting here, that he put the tablets in the ark he made, and there they are, as the Lord commanded me. There they are, present tense, still in the wooden box. At the end of Moses' life. He's addressing the Israelites, wrapping things up. And he says the tablets are in the box he built, the wooden one. He doesn't mention a gold upgrade, doesn't mention Bezalel, doesn't breathe a word about cherubim. As far as the author of Deuteronomy is concerned, the wooden box Moses built with his own hands is the ark. That's it, full stop. There's no sequel. There's no upgrade package. So you've got a choice. Either God designed 2 completely different objects and somehow forgot to mention the other one in each account. Or, and this is where we're 2 different people in 2 different centuries with 2 completely different ideas of what this thing was supposed to be, wrote 2 different descriptions, and somebody came along much later and stitched them both into the same book. Without telling you, they didn't agree. You were taught there was one ark. There isn't. That's the first lie. The second one is smaller, but honestly, it might bother you more, because you were also taught what was inside the ark. And the Bible can't get that straight either. So what's actually in the box? 1 Kings 8:9 tells you directly. Solomon has just finished building the temple, the most important structure in the history of Israel. He's moving the ark into the Holy of Holies, the most significant moment, the most significant room, the most significant object. And the author pauses to inventory what's inside. There was nothing in the ark except the 2 stone tablets that Moses had placed in it at Horeb. Nothing except the tablets. This author is specific. He uses the word nothing. He uses the word except. There's no wiggle room in that sentence. Tablets. That's it. The author of 1 Kings, narrating arguably the single most important religious event his civilization ever experienced, says the box has 2 stone tablets inside it and nothing else. Now here's where it gets strange. Open Hebrews 9:4. Same ark, supposedly. This ark contained the gold jar of manna, Aaron's staff that had budded, and the stone tablets of the covenant. 3 items, not one. The tablets, sure, but also a golden jar of manna, and Aaron's rod that miraculously sprouted. 3 things inside a box that 1 Kings says had one thing. And the author of 1 Kings didn't hedge. He didn't write, I think it was mainly the tablets. He said, nothing except. He was emphatic, categorical. Then about 1,000 years later, the author of Hebrews casually adds 2 more objects to the inventory, like they've always been there. Same box, same religion, 2 inventories. They flat out contradict each other. And if this is the Word of God, if God had a hand in both passages, then God doesn't remember what He put inside His own box. You were taught what was in the ark. Turns out the Bible can't agree on the answer. That's lie number 2. And those first 2, the outside doesn't match, the inside doesn't match. Look, I get it. If you really want to hold on, you can file them under different time periods, things got fuzzy, details shifted over the centuries. It's not comfortable, but it's survivable. You can lose a few specs and still keep the big picture more or less intact. What comes next, you can't file. This one isn't about 2 books written 1,000 years apart having different details. This is one God contradicting Himself in the same book, 5 chapters apart. And the contradiction is so direct, so plain, so completely impossible to miss once somebody shows it to you, that the fact nobody ever did tells you something about every person who was ever supposed to be teaching you this material. Lie number 3. And this is the one that should genuinely keep you up tonight. You remember the 10 Commandments, right? Exodus 20. Most famous moral code in human history. Verse 4. Commandment number 2. God speaking directly. You shall not make for yourself a graven image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Any likeness of anything in heaven above. That's not narrow language. That's not try to avoid the obvious stuff. It's a blanket prohibition. The broadest possible scope God could have chosen. No carved image, no likeness of anything in heaven, on earth, under the water. Total, comprehensive, done. 5 chapters later, same book, same God, still talking. Exodus 25:18. God is dictating the ark specifications to Moses. And He says, make 2 cherubim out of hammered gold at the ends of the cover. Cherubim, heavenly beings. In the Hebrew Bible, cherubim guard the entrance to Eden after the fall. They show up in Ezekiel's visions of the divine throne room in heaven. They are explicitly, by every definition available, beings that exist in heaven above. And God says, sculpt 2 of them out of gold and bolt them to my box. I need to say that again because it has to land. God says, do not make any image of anything in heaven. 5 chapters later, God says, make 2 gold images of heavenly beings and attach them to the lid of my most sacred object. Same book, same mouth. The counter-argument, and I know this one cold because I heard it 100 times growing up, goes like this. The second commandment is about images for worship. God isn't telling them to worship the cherubim. He's telling them to build components of the ark. Different context, different purpose. There's no actual contradiction. So let's slow down and look at what the text actually says. Verse 4. You shall not make for yourself a graven image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above. Verse 5. You shall not bow down to them or serve them. 2 clauses. 2 separate prohibitions. Verse 4 bans the making. Verse 5 bans the worshipping. Making is one act. Worshipping is a different act. They're listed as separate items because they are separate things a person can do. And the golden cherubim on the ark violate verse 4, the making prohibition. No matter what you do with verse 5. Argue that nobody worshipped them? Fine, great. Nobody's claiming they did, but somebody made them. Somebody hammered them out of gold. Somebody sculpted likenesses of heavenly beings. Which is exactly what verse 4, not verse 5, verse 4 says not to do. And then there's this. And once you see it, it just sort of, it sticks to the inside of your skull and it doesn't come off. The cherubim are on the lid. The commandment against making images of heavenly things is on the tablets inside the box. They are in physical contact with each other. The violation is sitting on top of the rule. Literally, physically, materially. The golden images of heavenly beings are resting on the container that holds the prohibition against making golden images of heavenly beings. Touching it. You were taught to revere this object. You were taught the commandments inside it were sacred law. And nobody, not once, told you the box breaks its own rules. That's the third lie. And it's sitting right there in Exodus, 5 chapters apart, waiting for anyone to notice. Has anyone, pastor, teacher, Sunday school volunteer, seminary professor, youth group leader, anybody ever actually said that to you in a room, out loud?
Has anyone ever taught the 10 Commandments and the Ark in the same session and gone, hey,
you notice these two things contradict each other? Because I think for nearly every person watching this, the answer is no. Not once. Not ever. And that silence? I don't think it's an oversight. I think somebody a long time ago, and then again last week, and then again the week before that, decided you didn't need to see both pages at once. And that decision got handed down through so many generations of people who also didn't know that by now, the silence just feels like the way things are. Like it's always been that way. It hasn't. It's a choice somebody makes every single Sunday. Tell me in the comments, did anyone ever show you both? Because I already know what most of you are going to say. If you're feeling something right now, irritation, confusion, that particular low-frequency hum where something you always assumed was load-bearing just cracked underneath you. Pay attention to that. That feeling has a name. It's called thinking for yourself. And somewhere along the line, someone taught you that doing it was dangerous. But here's what gets me. The contradiction inside Exodus isn't even the worst part. Because the Ark wasn't just breaking its own commandment. It was breaking it with somebody else's design. And when you see whose design, when you see where those cherubim and those poles and those purification rituals and that entire blueprint actually came from, you'll understand why nobody who stood at the front of your church ever wanted you reading both pages at the same time. Lie number 4. And honestly, this is the one that changed it for me, permanently. You were taught that God revealed the Ark's design on Sinai, original, divine, straight from heaven. Here's what they didn't tell you. I'm going to describe a sacred object from the ancient world. I want you to listen to every detail. I'm going to give you 8 of them, one at a time. And I want you to actually try, to figure out which object I'm talking about. 1. A sacred object carried on long poles by priests. 2. Those priests have undergone ritual purification before they're allowed to get near it. 3. On top of it, winged figures, facing each other. 4. It's veiled, concealed from the public. Nobody outside the priesthood sees it. 5. It gives orders. People bring questions and receive answers from the space between the rooms. 6. It leads military campaigns. When the army moves out, this object goes in front, and its presence means the god is physically there with the soldiers. 7. When it comes to rest, sacrifices are performed in front of it. 8. Only one priestly caste can handle it. Anybody else who touches it or gets too close, dead. You're seeing the Ark of the Covenant in your head right now. I know you are. Every single one of those 8 details maps perfectly onto what you learned about the Ark. That's the Egyptian sacred bark. Predates the earliest possible date for the Ark by centuries. And I'm not talking about some vague resemblance where, lots of ancient cultures had sacred boxes, so naturally there's some overlap. No. I mean point for point, function for function, restriction for restriction. If you laid the 2 descriptions next to each other, one from the Torah, one from Egyptian temple records, You genuinely could not tell which was which unless somebody told you. The bark was carried on poles by a priestly class called the Wab, the pure ones, who'd performed purification rites before they could lay hands on it. The ark, carried on poles by Levites who'd been ritually purified. The bark had winged figures on top. The nous of the bark of Amun, recovered from Seti I's mortuary temple at Korna, shows them clearly, wings outstretched, facing each other. The ark, cherubim, wings spread, facing each other. The bark was veiled, hidden from public view during transport. The ark, Numbers 4 says the priests covered it with layers of cloth before anyone else could come near, and it keeps going. The bark gave oracles. It would physically tilt forward or backward while being carried, yes or no, answering questions from the priests. The ark gave oracles. Exodus 25:22. God speaks from between the cherubim. The bark went to war. It marched with Egyptian armies as the God's physical presence on the battlefield. Sound familiar? Numbers 10:35. The Philistine Wars. Every time Israel fought, the ark was there. The bark could only be maintained by one specific priestly caste. The ark could only be handled by Levites. And in both systems, Egyptian and Israelite, unauthorized contact meant death. Now, this isn't me connecting dots on a conspiracy board. A professor at the University of Washington named Scott Noble, a guy who spent his entire career reading cuneiform and Egyptian hieratic, not somebody with a theological axe to grind, published a study in 2015 laying all of this out. His conclusion was straightforward. The ark's design, its function, its restrictions, its entire ritual framework is better explained as Egyptian in origin than by anything else anyone has ever proposed. Egypt. The civilization the Israelites had supposedly just walked away from. And I need you to actually feel what that means. Not just process it, feel it. Because the story you grew up hearing goes like this. God, on a mountain, in fire and smoke and earthquake, with the sky splitting open, God dictated these specifications personally to Moses. From heaven, the gold, the cherubim, the poles, the veil, the purification rules, all of it, original, divine, straight from the source. But every single one of those features already existed in Egypt for centuries before anybody climbed that mountain. The blueprints weren't revealed on Sinai. They were carried out of Egypt in the heads of people who'd spent their whole lives watching priests carry sacred bark on poles through temple courtyards. The thing that ended up in the Holy of Holies, the thing so sacred that nobody could touch it, nobody could look at it, the thing that would kill you for getting too close, was built from a design template that was already ancient when Moses was born, if Moses was born at all. You were told God designed it. The design was already old when Moses was born. That's lie number 4. So the question you can't dodge anymore is this. How did two completely different versions of this object, one a wooden box Moses banged together himself, the other a golden Egyptian-style throne Bezalel constructed under divine commission, end up in the same Bible? And why didn't anybody tell you? The answer is the same answer a man in The Hague worked out in 1670, sitting by himself with the same 5 books of Moses that are on your shelf right now. Spinoza noticed something in Deuteronomy that should have been blindingly obvious to anyone who read the words without already having decided what they needed to say. The book refers to Moses in the third person. Moses went up the mountain. Not I went up the mountain. It describes locations Moses never set foot in. Deuteronomy 1 places him beyond the Jordan, which is how someone standing in Israel would describe the far side of the river, not how you describe the ground under your own feet. And then it narrates, and I mean this one should stop anyone cold. It narrates Moses' death and his burial. Chapter 34. So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab. He buried him in the valley in the land of Moab. No one knows his burial place to this day. Moses did not write that sentence. Nobody writes their own obituary in past tense and then adds, to this day. Somebody else wrote Deuteronomy. Somebody living centuries after the events it describes. With their own sources, their own agenda, their own version of what the ark looked like. And somebody else entirely, different century, different traditions, different theology, wrote the Exodus version. 2 authors, 2 eras, 2 arcs. And Spinoza didn't need a shovel or a dig permit or a research grant to see it. He needed the 2 accounts on the same table at the same time. For that, for reading carefully, for treating the words like they meant what they said, his own people made sure nobody would speak to him again for the rest of his life. Not one person from his community was permitted to stand within 4 cubits of where he stood. Alright, stay with me here. Because what comes next is something I've been turning over for a while, and I still can't talk about it without my voice changing. I'm not angry at the text. I'm angry at what the story asks you to accept as good. Lie number 5. You were taught that the ark had real divine power, that people who touched it or got too close actually died, and that this proved the object was genuinely sacred. Here's what they left out. The stories about that power contradict each other so badly that even the body count is broken. 2 Samuel 6. David is bringing the ark to Jerusalem. Huge procession, music, dance, celebration. The whole nation is out there watching. The ark is on a brand new cart, oxen pulling it, and the oxen stumble. The cart lurches sideways. And a man named Uzzah, he's been walking right next to the ark. He's part of the family that's been guarding it for years. Reaches out his hand and steadies it. Reflex. Instinct. The holiest object in existence is about to slam into the dirt, and he catches it. God kills him, right there, in the road. Verse 7. The Lord's anger burned against Uzzah because of his irreverent act. Therefore, God struck him down, and he died there beside the ark of God. Irreverent act? That's what the text calls it? The man reached out to stop the most sacred object on the planet from crashing to the ground. That's his crime? That's the irreverence? A reflex. The same one you'd have, I'd have, any half-decent person on Earth would have. Just reach out and catch the thing. And heaven's response is dead. Instant. No hearing, no appeal.
Reach out and grab it.
I can see your intentions were good.
Reach out and grab
Dead in the road. Because he put his hand on the box. Think about that. Not as theology. Not through whatever filter they trained you to see these stories through. Just as a person. A man watches the most sacred thing his people have ever possessed tipping off a cart. And his body does what bodies do. He reaches. And the God who supposedly lives inside that box, the God described elsewhere in this same Bible as compassionate and gracious and slow to anger, that God kills him for it, on the spot, for the reflex of trying to help. Now, I can already hear it. The rules were clear. Levites carried on poles. David shouldn't have used a cart. The whole operation was wrong from the beginning. Fine. Sure. Let's grant that. Whose fault is the wrong operation? Uzzah didn't organize the procession. David organized it. David decided how the ark would travel. David chose the cart. David set the whole thing up. And the person who dies for it isn't the king who made the bad call. It's the man walking beside the box who instinctively tried to keep it from hitting the ground. The person with the least authority absorbs the total punishment. The person with the most authority gets a scare and a lesson and goes on to become the greatest king in Israelite history. If that's what divine justice looks like, I don't know what the word justice is doing anywhere near that sentence. And then it gets worse. Because there's a body count problem connected to this object that almost nobody has ever heard about. Earlier in the story, 1 Samuel 6:19, the Philistines had captured the ark in battle, gotten hammered by plague for having it, and finally sent it back to the Israelites on a cart. It rolls into a small town called Beth Shemesh, and some of the townspeople, Israelites by the way, the good guys, the ones the ark is coming home to, look inside it. God kills them. How many? And this, right here, this question, should make every "the Bible is inerrant" claim go extremely quiet. Because the standard Hebrew text says God struck down 50,070 men. 50,070. For looking inside a box in a small farming town in the foothills south of Jerusalem. A town that couldn't have held 50,000 people if you stacked them on top of each other. Other ancient copies of the same passage, some of them older than the version your translation is based on, say 70. Just 70. Still horrifying, still a mass killing for the act of curiosity. But at least it's a number that could physically happen in the real world. So, 70 or 50,070? Nobody knows. The manuscripts don't agree. Either a scribe's hand slipped and inflated the death toll by a factor of roughly 700, or somebody later in the chain deliberately pumped the number to make the ark seem more terrifying than it already was. Either way, here's what you're left with. The Bible cannot tell you how many people God killed for looking inside the ark. The body count is corrupted at the source. And in 2.5 millennia of scribes hand-copying this passage, generation after generation, nobody fixed it. The most sacred object in the entire religion, and the record of what it supposedly did to people, can't even get the number of dead right. A man dies for trying to save it from falling. 70, or 50,070, die for looking inside it. And the manuscripts can't agree on how many bodies dropped. You were taught the ark's power was real, that the death toll proved it was sacred. But the death toll itself is broken. The proof doesn't work. That's lie number 5, which, when you step back from it, is exactly the lesson of the Uzzah story. Isn't it? Don't touch. Don't look. Don't reach out. Don't get close. And if you felt, from the very first time you heard that story, whether you were 8 years old, or 18, or 30, sitting in the back row trying not to make eye contact, that something about it was deeply wrong. That a God who kills a man for catching a falling box is not good, is not just, is not something you want at the center of your life. You were right the whole time. You were right, and nobody in your world ever gave you permission to say so. 5 down. And honestly, if I just stopped here, if I said, the exterior descriptions don't match, the contents don't match, the lid violates its own commandment, the design was lifted from Egypt, and the proof of its power falls apart under its own weight, that would fill a whole video by itself. That would be enough to make most people close the book and sit in silence for a while. But there's a 6th one, and it's the one that, once you see it, makes everything else suddenly make a terrible kind of sense. Because once you understand this, you'll know why the contradictions were never cleaned up, why nobody reconciled the 2 designs, or fixed the body count, or addressed the Egyptian parallels, why all of it was just left there, in the text. Showing. Lie number 6. You were taught that the ark's disappearance is one of the great mysteries of the Bible, maybe of human history, that it's hidden somewhere, that it might be found, that its absence is significant and dramatic and unexplained. Here's the truth. The Bible doesn't treat it as a mystery at all. The Bible doesn't even seem to notice it's gone. The most sacred object your religion ever claimed to possess disappears. And the Bible doesn't care. Not disappears mysteriously. Not disappears in a dramatic scene with weeping priests and angelic intervention and trumpets. I mean it just stops being mentioned, drops out of the text, like a character the writers forgot about halfway through the series. And you'd think, if the ark was real, if it mattered as much as they told you it did, that the moment it vanished would be one of the most documented events in the entire Bible. But here's what actually happens. 2 Kings 25. The Babylonians breach the walls of Jerusalem. They're tearing Solomon's temple apart, stone by stone. And the author, you can read this yourself tonight, goes into obsessive, almost compulsive inventory of what the invaders hauled off. Verse 13, the bronze pillars, the bronze stands, the bronze seat, that enormous basin in the temple courtyard. Verse 14, the pots, the shovels, the wick trimmers, the dishes for incense. Verse 15, the censers, the sprinkling bowls, everything made of pure gold, everything made of silver, the captain of the guard took away. This author cares about inventory deeply. Bronze shovels on the list. Wick trimmers, the little tools they used for trimming the wicks on oil lamps, on the list. Recorded for posterity. Wick trimmers made the cut, and the Ark of the Covenant. The golden box with the cherubim, the mercy seat, the tablets of the law, the object that was supposed to be sitting in the center of the room. These Babylonians are currently smashing to rubble. Doesn't make the list. Not there. Not mentioned. Not stolen. Not destroyed. Not hidden. Not smuggled. Not mourned. Not accounted for in any way. The most sacred object in the religion. The thing that was supposed to be right there, dead center of the Holy of Holies. And when the temple comes down, and the conquerors are cataloging every piece of bronze and silver they're carting off to Babylon, the Ark gets nothing. Not a sentence. Not a clause. The author who noted the wick trimmers did not note the Ark of God. He either didn't know where it was, didn't think it mattered, or, and this is the possibility that should make your stomach drop,
Take 3,
it
take
wasn't
4.
there, hadn't been there, maybe for a long time. And then there's the verse that should end every single conversation anybody's ever had about searching for the Ark. Jeremiah 3:16. The prophet speaking what he says are the words of God himself. In those days, when your numbers have increased greatly in the land, people will no longer say, the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. It will never enter their minds or be remembered. It will not be missed, nor will another one be made. It will not be missed. Let that actually register. A prophet, speaking for God, in God's name, with God's authority, says the most sacred object the religion ever possessed is going to be forgotten, won't cross anybody's mind, won't be mourned, won't be rebuilt, and nobody should bother looking for it. Think about what that does to every Netflix documentary, every archaeological expedition, every History Channel special with the night vision cameras and the dramatic music, every self-appointed Ark hunter with a theory about a cave in Ethiopia, or a tunnel under the Temple Mount, or some government warehouse in Washington. The Bible, the book these people claim to build their lives on, says, stop. It's done. Let it go. You won't even miss it. The prophet tells you. God tells you. And the entire industry that keeps the search alive, the books, the shows, the conferences, the donation-funded expeditions, every bit of it depends on you not reading Jeremiah 3:16. Depends on you never finding out that the Bible itself closed this case centuries ago, stamped it, filed it, said, don't bother. You were taught the disappearance was a mystery. The Bible says it's not. That's lie number 6. The most sacred object the religion ever claimed. 2 descriptions of the outside that don't match. 2 inventories of the inside that don't match. A lid that violates the commandment it sits on top of. A blueprint borrowed from the empire the Israelites just fled. A God who kills a man for catching it when it falls. A body count so mangled the manuscripts can't agree on the number. And then, silence. The thing just vanishes. The Bible makes a list of every wick trimmer the Babylonians stole, and doesn't mention the Ark. And a prophet, speaking in the name of God, says, forget it, you won't miss it. Nobody will. I want to stop for a second. Not to recap. You tracked all of that. But because something built up over the last 20-odd minutes that I think matters more than any individual point I made. You walked into this with an image in your head. Golden box. Winged angels. Power. Mystery. the sacred object at the center of the faith. And what you actually found? When you opened the pages, both pages at the same time, which is the one thing nobody standing at the front of a room ever asked you to do, isn't a mystery. It's a patchwork, stitched together across centuries by people who never met each other, never compared notes, never agreed on what this thing looked like, or what was inside it, or what it could do, or who built it, or what happened to it. The stitches have been visible this entire time. The only reason you never noticed is that somebody, a long time ago, and then again recently, and then again the week before that, told you not to look too closely. And you listened. Because somewhere in your life, you absorbed the idea that looking closely at this book was the same as doubting it. And doubting it was the same as sinning. And sinning near this particular object could get you killed. And underneath it all, underneath the gold and the wings and the power and the stories about people dying for getting too close, there's one last thing, the seventh lie. And honestly, it might be the only one that actually matters when everything else fades. You were taught that the Ark of the Covenant was the most sacred object in the history of your religion, that the name itself carried weight, something holy, something set apart. But the Hebrew word the Bible uses for the Ark, Aron, look it up tonight, takes 10 seconds. Aron does not mean sacred vessel, doesn't mean throne of God, doesn't mean holy receptacle or divine container or anything with weight or grandeur. It means box, chest, container. The same word shows up in Genesis 50 for the coffin they laid Joseph's embalmed body in after he died in Egypt. Same word in 2 Kings 12 for a money chest in the temple. Literally a donation box with a slot in the top where people dropped coins. Any box, any chest, any ordinary thing you'd store stuff in. The most sacred object in the history of monotheism. The thing in the center of the room, so holy that touching it killed a man, and looking inside it killed a town.
And in the original language, in the actual Hebrew,
it doesn't even have a sacred name. It's Aron, a box. That's what it's always been, as far as the language is concerned. A box that different people in different centuries kept telling bigger stories about. Until the box was gold. Until the box had angels. Until the box could kill you. Until the box was God Himself, sitting between the wings. But the word never changed. Through every layer of legend, and every rewrite, and every new author adding gold, or blood, or wings, the word underneath all of it stayed exactly the same.
Dumbass!
Box. The whole time.
Stupid!
You were taught the name meant something sacred. It doesn't. It means box. That's the seventh lie. A box nobody can agree on how to build. A box nobody can agree on what's inside. A box whose lid breaks the commandment it carries. A box whose blueprints were old before Moses was born. A box whose God killed a man for catching it. A box the Bible can't be bothered to track when it disappears. A box that a prophet says, in God's name, nobody will even remember. Spinoza saw this. 1670. Alone. A rented room in The Hague. The same text that's been on your shelf your whole life. He didn't have a dig site. Didn't have a department. Didn't have a team. He had the 5 books of Moses, and the willingness to read them as though the words actually meant what they said, without first deciding what they were required to mean. And he saw exactly what you just saw. The text contradicts itself about the thing at its own center. The words on the page don't agree with each other. The document isn't a blueprint handed down from heaven. It's layers. Tradition stacked on top of tradition. Century piled onto century. Until a box became a throne. And a throne became a weapon. And a weapon became a mystery. And the mystery became so sacred that questioning it felt like sin. He saw through every layer. And the difference between him and you is this. Tomorrow morning, you can talk about what you just heard, out loud, to anyone you want. He couldn't. For the rest of his life, nobody from his community was permitted to stand within 4 cubits of him. For reading carefully, for putting both pages on the table. Those 7 lies have been on your shelf the whole time. In the book you were told was perfect, breathed by God, without error. The difference between this morning and right now isn't that you learned something new. It's that you finally opened both pages at once. And there's no version of tomorrow where you only remember one of them. Of these 7, the 2 designs that can't both be real, the inventory that contradicts itself, the commandment the lid violates, the Egyptian blueprint, the power that falls apart under its own evidence, the disappearance nobody bothered to explain, and the name that just means box. Which one had you never heard before? Which one was sitting there in your Bible this whole time without a single person pointing at it? Tell me in the comments. Because I'm fairly sure for most of you, it's not just one.
God damn it.
Hit the like. Hit the hype button when it shows up on your screen. That's the single biggest thing you can do to push this in front of somebody who's still being told the box was designed by God on a mountaintop. And if there's someone in your life who needs to hear this, a parent, a friend, somebody you haven't figured out how to have this conversation with yet, send it. Not to start a fight, just to share it. Spinoza couldn't send it to anyone. He didn't have that option. You do.
Yeah, fucking goddamn Christ. A fucking Christ. Jesus fucking Christ.
Hey everybody, I was just made aware of a video that was posted yesterday by a content creator named Brandon McGuire, who runs a YouTube channel with over 1 million subscribers called Daily Dose of Wisdom. Brandon didn't tag me in the video, but here's the video. It's entitled Popular Bible Scholar Misleads Thousands, Example Provided. Thought I would take a look and respond to what Brandon has to say.
The Bible doesn't endorse abortion. A lot of people think the opposite is true, that the Bible condemns abortion. But if this is the only place where it seems to actually directly mention something about abortion, and then even then it's probably not even about abortion, where does this opposite idea come from, that the Bible does condemn abortion?
Actually, good question. Most of the time, folks who argue that the Bible condemns abortion, they're going to appeal to a handful of passages that suggest God has knowledge of and concern for gestation. And so you see this in, for instance, Jeremiah 1:5, where Jeremiah says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you and consecrated you a prophet to the nations." And
I formed you in the womb. I think that's important to note. You were in the womb. Jeremiah was in the womb. The person Jeremiah existed in the womb.
Well, I think it's more important to acknowledge that all this is being said about Jeremiah prior to his conception. And that's why I emphasize before in that translation. Because it's saying that God knew Jeremiah prior to his conception. And this is a fact about this passage that just scorches by miles over the heads of everybody who thinks they have the definitive grasp on what the Hebrew Bible is talking about. And they just don't. Because if God's foreknowledge about Jeremiah prior to his conception means that Jeremiah was a moral and a legal person prior to his conception, then it means that all people who will ever be born already have full moral and legal personhood. And you are not ready for the implications of that argument, because that would mean that if a woman was, according to God's foreknowledge, supposed to get pregnant and give birth as the result of rape,
that it would therefore be murder to prevent that rape. Or it would constitute murder to stop two 12-year-olds from engaging in premarital sex if God knew that the girl was supposed to conceive and get pregnant and bear a child that God already knew, therefore granting that child full legal and moral personhood before their conception. What's going on in Jeremiah 1:5 is Jeremiah is boasting about how his consecration and calling as a prophet even precedes his gestation. Because we see that, as I've noted in other videos, in Mesopotamian, in Egyptian, and in other biblical writings, that prophets and kings will say, I was called by God or ordained by God from the womb. And Jeremiah says, I'm going to do you one better. God knew me before I was formed in the womb, before my conception. That's what's going on in Jeremiah. And no matter how many times I point this out, it again just scorches by miles over the heads of everyone who imagines that they know what they're talking about.
Argument is that, well, Jeremiah was obviously a person. Jeremiah was a human being prior to being born. Therefore, human life begins at conception. You also have in the Psalms, you have a passage about how God knit me together in my mother's womb. You have the story of John the Baptist, the fetal John the Baptist leaping for joy in Elizabeth's womb upon hearing the voice of Mary, the mother of Jesus. Those are the three most popular passages that get appealed to suggest that a human being begins at conception. And the idea is murder is the killing of an innocent human. Human lives begin at conception, therefore abortion is murder, and therefore abortion is wrong. And what this neglects to take account of is the fact that when we look at legal codes and legislation and stuff like that, we tend to assume that if there are principles anywhere, that they apply universally, and that everything fits perfectly into a perfectly systematic whole. And so the idea must be that, if over here we treated a fetus as somebody who can leap for joy or something like that, well then we could never, obviously, treat a fetus in another part of the text as not a full legal and moral person.
Well, we would need a really good reason to not treat them as a full legal and moral person if a precedent has been clearly set. So let's see if you can give us a case for why they aren't.
But what we see throughout the Hebrew Bible is that a fetus was not considered a full legal and moral person. It was considered more property. And the most explicit example of that is in the Covenant Code, Exodus 21, verses 22 through 25, where we have this peculiar bit of legislation where it says if two men are fighting and they hit a woman and a pregnant woman, and there are two outcomes that are addressed in this legislation. If the injury causes her to miscarry, then there's a fine that is imposed by the husband, and then there are arbitrators that are there to ensure that it is exorbitant. If the injury results in permanent injury to the woman or her death, then it is talionic justice, which is life for life, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. In other words, if this injury causes the woman to die, then it's the death penalty for the perpetrator.
See? If a pregnant woman is struck and miscarries, the only penalty is a fine. That proves the fetus wasn't a person. That proves the fetus is treated like property. But there's a very big problem with this.
No, there's not.
We're going to show it all in this video.
No, you're not.
We're going to analyze this carefully.
No, you're not.
What is Exodus 21 actually describing? Shout out to Logos Bible Software for helping to bring clarity to this question for me. Can someone please send the link in the description, which is logos.com/DDOW to Dan McClellan? Because anyone who clicks that link gets 60 days totally free to explore this software. I would love for him to be able to do so because Logos software makes it so much easier to analyze that beloved data and to get to the bottom of these issues. Can someone please hook up Mr. McClellan?
So, three things here. One, it sounds like this video is just an excuse for Brandon to put on display how to use logos to understand the Bible better so he can rack up some ad revenue. And what he's going to demonstrate is that he clearly doesn't know the first thing about Hebrew, but also doesn't really know how to effectively use logos. Second thing, I don't need a copy of logos. I wrote a dozen entries for their Lexham Bible Dictionary over 15 years ago, and was given a free copy when I lived in Bellingham, Washington, which is where Logos is headquartered, and I was a graduate student at Trinity Western University. So I have had Logos for over 15 years, and I actually prefer Accordance Bible software, which I was also given while I was a student at Trinity Western University, because I was a research assistant for Marty Abegg and tagged a bunch of technical manuscripts for Accordance to incorporate into their Bible software. So I have used both for over 15 years, and I think Accordance does a much better job for close textual and linguistic analysis. And third thing, something that Logos has been doing for a while now that I don't think is a good idea, is trying to convince people that if you just get Logos, you suddenly have the key to open all exegetical doors. And this leads to fewer people actually going out and getting adequate training in his language. But, as Brandon is going to demonstrate in this video, if you don't have adequate training, you're just going to fumble the tool itself. And it's just going to mislead you into believing because you have this tool, your intuitions and your misunderstandings are now suddenly authorized by Logos. And as we're going to see, that couldn't be further from the truth.
Two things that he just said that are not actually in the text, and I'm going to prove it right now.
All right, let's see it.
The first one is the idea that this is talking about a miscarriage. It is not.
It definitely is.
The second one is the idea that the harm here in reference is talking about harm to the mother only. That also is not in the text, and I'm going to, again, prove it really quick.
No, you're not.
Here, I'm going to try to go as fast as I can. Here's the passage that he's talking about. Now, the version that he was using here is right here. You can see the NRSV, and in his version it says there is a miscarriage. But there's a problem with that. That's a very bad translation, and I'm going to show why right now.
Brandon is not remotely qualified enough to assess quality in Bible translation, as we're going to see.
If you go to, for example, the ESV or the KJV, you can start to see the way that this is translated differently. And really, the ESV is a more literal translation. Her children come out. But don't take my word for it. Let's actually look at this word right here, children. What is that word, children? What is that word, children, talking about? Let me pull it up right here for you. Let me give you the actual Hebrew right here. Pronounced this way. Oops, sorry, here. Yeled, okay? Yeled. Now, this is the same word for children outside of the womb, and that's really important because in Dan's translation, that's just kind of glossed over.
So a few things here. One, nothing has been glossed over. Brandon just doesn't even begin to know what he's talking about. And Brandon has glossed over something quite important. Why is the word for children in the plural in this passage? Brandon is talking about a single pregnant woman. And it says, her children come out. Why is that plural? Does this law only apply if a woman is carrying twins or triplets? Does this mean all of the contents of the womb? Is it a plural of generalization? Is it a plural of abstract, referring to the pregnancy? Why is it plural? There.
Suck my motherfucking dick.
Fluid into the common era, the Old Testament materials, is not solid. It's not
is definitely borrowing from Josephus.
I was going to say,
check out my or your video with Steve Mason on that. He really makes the case. He really just makes it so obvious. How he's constantly mentioning like places that are mentioned in Josephus, with conjunction with characters that are mentioned in Josephus, the sequence of events lining up, all that stuff.
Yeah. John is post 70. 2 Peter, the pastoral letters seem to be post 70. If you go with the consensus argument, look, you can get a little. Listen, I'm going to throw a little bit of hardball. I was going to say, like, there are some scholars who
think the whole thing is after 70.
Everything's after 70.
You know what's crazy about that? That makes, if that's true, if I'm not saying that they're right, like, whatever, I'm not going to sit here and say who's right or wrong, but if they're right, if Nina and Jack Bull and them are right, that this is all post-70, Christianity all of a sudden makes way more sense.
Because
it becomes a replacement of Judaism at that point. Judaism's gone. I'm talking about Temple Judaism. Now we need something different. Well, let's chill out on the laws. Let's do something. It makes more sense from a cultural point of view why Christianity would start after 70.
Yeah, I'll grab the book just to show her some love. If you're interested in checking out her book, she ultimately argues that a category of epistolary fictions. She compares the letters of Paul to other epistolary fictions, and she's convinced
it looks like second sophistic Greek, which is Greek that you would find like Lucian's Greek in the 2nd century AD.
It's very interesting.
And don't know Paul is a scholar. It's not like she's some random, what do you call it? What's his name? Graham Hancock, just some random person who doesn't study the stuff, just wrote a book. No, this is peer-reviewed through Oxford, and not only that, she's not just a random New Testament scholar, she's a Pauline, professor of Pauline.
Emeritus too.
So we're talking about someone who actually knows what she's talking about. We should listen to this.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, obviously, very, very awesome friend of ours too. Stefan, last one says how many of the sources cited in against Appian actually were real and not made-up sources invented by the Roman imperial cult. I have never investigated that.
I think against Appian is it's Josephus, but I think is that the one? Oh no, that's not the one. I'm thinking of another one. There was one that wasn't actually written by Josephus. This one is legitimate. But yeah, I don't know exactly what you mean by that. But that's like it's a little above my pay grade, I guess. I don't know. I'm not familiar with it.
Thank you so much. All right, next one is Salty Crab Guy, I believe.
Yeah.
It says why no pushback on Reza on myth vision? Good question. So I interviewed Reza Aslan, and I think that's how you pronounce it. Reza Aslan, who actually hypothesized that Jesus was a zealot. And in this conversation, he pretty much sees mythicism as ridiculous, and he makes that comment on the channel. For two reasons. When I go into these interviews with some of these scholars, I have a very strict time limit. I have 90 minutes. The last thing I cared to do in this episode was get bogged down on a mythicism question when I'm literally trying to extract the ideas and popularize them, which, by the way, the video did really good, Neil. I don't know if you noticed. It had like 26,000 views in a day or something, which is really good. I think it was something like that. And the goal was to get as many people acquainted with a radical insurgent type Jesus, a militant Jesus. And if we get stopped on pressing on mythicism in that episode, we'll get nowhere. I really would love to see that spark some conversation and debate between the actual people who hold the mythicism and Reza, meaning we could get a debate happening maybe with Richard Carrier and him, if he would do it. But I don't bog myself down on it. I'm not an apologist for mythicism. I'm not an apologist for historicism. I don't care. If the scholar thinks it's ridiculous, I let the scholar say what they want. We move forward. My goal was not to dwell on mythicism in that.
I seem to have fucked up my life pretty good here. So
she said fuck.